back to Media Makers Hub. My name's Erica, and today we're going to look at camcorders and DSLRs. So, for the first part of this video, we are going to focus mainly on camcorders. So this is more of a simpler video camera that you may see in comparison to some of the other ones you may interact with. So, whether you're filming a family event, starting your own YouTube channel, or you're just learning for fun, this guide will kind of walk you through all the steps so that you can get started. So, let's hop in. Okay, first things first, we're gonna just take a look at the main parts of the camcorder. So this is the one that I have. It is a Canon Vixia HFR 400. There are definitely newer ones on the market and all that stuff, but this is the one that I have. So the first thing, and one of the most important things, is the lens. So the lens is right up here, but you're going to notice that you can't see it. That's because this particular camera has a lens cover, and it's just a little switch that's on the side here that brings the door open and down to protect the lens. This is how it all works. The light goes in through this lens, and then it creates the image. So much like any other camera that you're going to work with, lenses are real sensitive. So you're going to want to refrain from touching it and getting scratches on it, mainly because it's a pain in the butt to deal with the scratches later. So the next thing is going to be your screen. So on this particular one, there's a door right here. This door flips open, and there is your screen. Bear with me. So the screen right here, that's where you're going to frame up your shot. That's where you're going to review that footage and then just navigate through the settings. But we'll talk about settings and all that stuff later when we get to it. So these screens also flip. So depending on which way you're filming, whether you're the one recording and behind it or you need it to see, you can flip that and it'll let you do that. There is the battery slot. It's this piece back here. So each one's going to be a little different depending on your model of camera, but this is the battery spot in the back. And this is what this one's battery looks like. It's kind of beefy, but it's okay. So whilst we're back here, this is also where that record button is on this particular camera. It's this silver one right here. It's got a little bit of red on it just to signify that it's the record button, and that's where all of that works. All right, so now we're gonna set up the camcorder. So if you're using a tripod, go ahead and mount your camcorder on it and make sure it's secured tightly to avoid any shaky footage. This does have a tripod mount spot on it, but for the purpose of this to show you things, I'm just going to keep it on the table here. Next, you're going to check your battery to make sure it's charged. If you're running low, plug it in or just swap it out with a spare. You're not going to want to be running around with low batteries and take that chance. If you're using a memory card, which most people do, it's one of the more simple ways to capture audio and video. You're going to insert it into the slot, and then you're always going to make sure there's enough storage on here for your recording. No one wants to run out of room halfway through a shot. This is the first time I'm going to say this, but this isn't the last time I'm going to say this. Have multiples or backups of both memory cards and batteries. And sometimes cameras, but that's not usually the case. Usually you just want a backup of a battery and a memory card. So, batteries, memory card. We're going to show you the memory card first. So, we've got our camera. The memory card in this one is inside this portion here. It is this little door here that slides open and close. And you're going to take this guy and slide it right in. There really is only, these are built so there's really only one way that they can go in. So you go in, push it until it clicks, flip that door back. You've got a memory card in there. These guys, this is where the battery goes. It has a battery release, little tab down here, that just helps hold the battery in. We're gonna slide this guy in, and now you've got a battery. So take this guy out, you pull our tab back here, battery pack slides right out. How to take your memory card out, open your little door, push down and let it release, and it'll open up, and there's your memory card. So I'm gonna put this all back together, and then we're gonna talk about turning on the camcorder. Alrighty, we've got a memory card in here, we've got a battery in here. Now it's time to power it on. So you're gonna look for your power button. Usually it's located towards like the side or the back of the camcorder. This one in particular, it is on that inside panel where that memory card is. However, how this one works is that once this battery is inserted, it's gonna auto turn on. So once I flip this door open to turn it on, it's gonna automatically do it. So if I turn this guy around, give it a second, there we are. So this is gonna be your settings page. It'll come up and we'll talk about it in just a little bit. We're not gonna talk about it right now. But some camcorders, like I say, don't do this. They don't automatically turn on when you open the door. So this top button right here that says on and off next to it, that is our on-off button. So this does work where you can turn it on or off via that button. So right now we are off. I'm gonna click that button and it's gonna come back to life. Ta-da! And then if I click it again, it's gonna give me a message and it's gonna turn off. So now that you know where that is, we're then gonna go take a look at what the settings are on this camera. Alrighty, here we are with our close-up of our screen. I'm gonna power this guy on. There we are. So, with how this one is set up, the first thing that's gonna come up is you're gonna pick your language of choice. This one is set on English, so that's what we're gonna use. We're gonna click this button up here, let you go through. Now, I'm not gonna worry too much about the date since I don't really use this to film too often and I'm not too picky about that, but sometimes you are going to want to set the correct date and all that fun stuff. So for the sake of this, I'm just gonna move on. And then this is where you would type in that actual date and time. Keep on going. Oh wait, I gotta click OK first. Click OK, if it'll let me. And then click the continue button. So this is where it'll let you choose MP4 or AVCHD. I personally shoot, when I use this in MP4, just because it is the best suitable for like web upload and things like that. But if you click this guy, this one is compatible with their like baby mode and like more for that like home video kind of stuff. So I'm gonna switch it back to MP4 and then we're gonna continue. So that just says you've set it up and all that fun stuff. So we're gonna hit OK. And then it's gonna tell you that. I'm gonna open up the thing because there, and that's the set. That's what you're seeing. So it's an auto everything now. So we've got our camera turned on. We're gonna take a look at some of our settings here. So if we hop up and click the house, we've got our shooting mode. So if we click on this guy, this gives us a bunch of options. So we've got ones like baby mode, which it like unique stamps you can add, and it's got a special playback mode, but it's only for that AVCHD format. Auto is the mode that I shoot in pretty regularly if I'm using this one. Basically the camcorder does all the work. You don't really do any of the settings yourself or anything like that. And then we've got cinema, which if we click on OK for cinema, it'll give us a bunch of options. So we've got like different colors, and I'm gonna switch our lens open actually so you can see that as you switch these, so like that's vivid, but let's hop back into this guy. But we've got like cool tones, a bunch of different stuff. So we're gonna hop back. So that's cinema mode. We've also got scene mode. So this one you can basically do it where like the scene mode matches your situation. So you can either like, you can control the focus, the brightness, and like a bunch of other stuff. So we've got options like portrait, we've got a sports one, we've got night, a snow one, beach, sunset, low light, spotlight, and fireworks. So basically this will just let you pick things, and it has auto settings for like the certain situations you're in. And then programmed AE, so basically the camera controls the shutter speed and the aperture automatically, and then you control the focus and a bunch of other, and all the other settings. So basically, the ones that most people shoot in are the programmed one or the auto. I personally shoot in auto just because I don't use this too often. So then we've got recording setup. So this just lets you choose the output and the video quality. And then you've got your other settings, which is very much like any other kind of piece of equipment. You've got all the options you could want on there. And then the last one, the other direction, we've got main functions. So this is kind of like a real quick look into what options you have on here. So yeah, this one lets you put effects on the screen. This one just takes a photo of that while you're on there and all that fun stuff. So then we're going to talk about what the screen looks like when you're recording. Everything is green. That means good. It likes the SD card and that it's ready to film. So when I click the record button, you're going to see that green at the top turn red. So that means this is recording. That's the only indicator that it's recording. This camcorder does not have any other lights or anything that say it's going. So I'm going to stop that because then we're going to talk about some other stuff. So when it comes to framing and focusing and all that stuff, I set this guy into auto, and most of them will set into some kind of auto focusing function because this one does not have a manual focus. So that's one thing you don't have to worry about with this particular model is it doesn't really have a manual focus. So it's on auto. But one thing it does have is it does have a zoom. So back here, there's a little black bar right here that either zooms in one way or zooms out the other. So that'll help you zoom in on your subject and get closer without actually having to move your whole entire body and camera and tripod. So when you're doing this, just making sure everybody and all the things you have are in the shot and that they're in focus and that it looks good and not shaky. So those are kind of like the more important things when it comes to filming this. So you've just hit record again so that it stops your film and you want to take a look at it. So right underneath our button that says on off is our button that has a little square with a little play button in it. So when you click that, it'll bring up a bunch of shots. So I have filmed a couple different things on here. So you have a bunch of different clips. You would just click on said clip and it'll start playing. So you heard my voice for a little bit, but that's how you will review your footage. And then if you click it again, it'll bring you back to your main screen. So once you've captured everything and you make sure it looks good, you're good. You've done it. You've recorded on a camcorder. Once you've taken everything apart, you've got your battery, you've got your SD card, you've got the main body of the camera. You can take your SD card or memory card, plug it into a computer, and then you can look at all your footage and then decide what looks good. You can plug your battery in so that it charges, and then you've got something to edit and post. Before we wrap up, there are a few tips to make your camcorder experience a little bit better. So using a tripod for stable shots, especially when you're shooting like an interview or some kind of presentation, that'll just help it all look really nice. And then you're going to want to monitor your audio. Some camcorders have the capability of attaching external audio devices to them. Some of them don't. So that's something that you would have to look into. Keeping your lens clean. Lenses are really sensitive. And if they're dirty, it's going to show up on your, it's going to show up when you go to look at your footage. And it's going to look gross. And then checking your battery and memory cards. There is nothing worse in this world than running out of either mid-shoot. So always having multiple batteries, multiple SD cards, multiple of everything, so that you're always ready for the next thing. So I'm going to clean up my mess here, and then we're going to hop in and talk about some DSLRs. Alrighty, so now we're going to move on to talking about DSLRs. So within this portion of the video, there are going to be some topics that we're going to explain a bit more in depth on another video that's going to come out later. So don't worry too much about those if you get a little confused. Okay, we're going to start with the basics. This is your DSLR. So it is gonna look intimidating, and all the buttons and all the controls are gonna seem a little scary, but that's okay. But this also is going to be really true considering that in the earlier part of this video we talked about camcorders, which are a really easy piece of equipment to use, and DSLRs are not necessarily the most easy thing to use. So we're going to look at a Canon EOS Rebel T7. This is the current DSLR that I own. It's the one I know how to use the most. So some of the settings on this camera and buttons on this camera may not transfer to all DSLRs. So if you get confused, the best thing that you can do is like find a video on your specific model of DSLR that you're going to be using, because then you can get some like very specific locations for certain buttons and things like that. One of the best things I was ever told when I started working with new equipment is Google it. Google is your best friend. So if I don't answer something or you have a setting on your camera that I don't have on this one, Google it. You can find other YouTube videos about all the fun stuff about very specific cameras. So the first things we've got is a lens and a camera body. So our body of our camera here, this houses all that fun tech stuff that makes the camera work. But then to get actual stuff going, you need a lens. So lenses can come in a bunch of different types, a bunch of different sizes, but these guys can get real pricey depending on what you're trying to do. So today we're just going to take a look at a standard 18 to 55 millimeter lens. Some camera kits come with like a zoom lens, some just come with this lens. You can buy tons and tons of different kinds. Since we're talking about the body, we're going to go ahead and flip this guy around. So when you take a look at the back here, this top piece right here, this little square, that is your viewfinder. So that's what you would use to look through it, to take composing shots and just basically see what you're doing. But a lot of cameras also have this screen here. It essentially does the same thing as the viewfinder. It's just a digital screen that shows you what you're doing. The choice between the two is a personal preference. I suggest learning how to use both, because you never know when you're going to need to switch between the two. Sometimes you may be doing something and you can't see the screen really well, so you got to use the viewfinder. Or the viewfinder is being weird, and so then you have to rely on your screen. But just learn how to use both. It's easier that way. So, flipping the camera from this to up the top view, we've got our mode dial. So, the mode dial here, that's where you're going to choose what you want to shoot in. There are a plethora of modes, as you can see. We'll talk more about that later. Next to that, we're going to see our shutter button. It's that button right here. So you click that, takes the picture. I know it seems really simple, but humor me for a second. And then up right above that, there's a little scroll wheel. We'll talk about what that does in a little bit. It mainly helps with some settings things. And then there's also a button up there that if your flash isn't already up, it'll pop it up for you. And then we've got our on and off button, but we'll get into all that later on. Now that we've talked about some other parts of this camera, the last thing that we're going to talk about on the front here is our lens release button. It is this button over here that when you go to take your lens off, you're going to have to click that and it'll release the mechanism to allow you to take your lens off. So that is going to be, when talking about the lens release button, it's going to be really important for you to research and find out what type of lens mount you have. So the lens mount is this actual piece like down here that holds your lens on. And if you know what type of mount you have, you can buy lenses that you know for a fact are going to fit. Sometimes Canons require adapters and things like that for their cameras because they have a bunch of different types of lens mounts. Nikons sometimes don't have that, so that just comes down to the specific camera that you're using. So you want to make sure you know what lens mount you have. And then, as you've seen from this lens and from our camera here, I've got a bunch of caps on everything. These guys are called dust caps, or at least I call them dust caps. These two pieces are. But if I was to flip this over, this here, this is a lens cap because it sits actually on top of the lens, whereas the dust caps don't. So basically, a dust cap is a cap that covers parts of the lens and camera so that it doesn't get broken or have any issues while you're traveling or even while it's not in use. While this isn't in use, this sits with all the caps on in my bag so that nothing happens. So once you've picked out your camera body, camera lens, we're going to take our dust covers off, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to show you how to attach the camera. So a lot of these ones just give a quick little twist and off. Most of them only go one direction, so you really can't like screw it on there. So they all kind of pop off like that. So when you're looking at cameras and lenses, how to attach them, first thing you're going to find is, once it decides to focus, that little square, or sometimes it's a dot. Regardless, there's going to be something on your lens that indicates where it needs to line up on your mount. So if I pull up our camera here, up near the top there is a square. So we're going to line up those two squares and then twist and going to connect them together. So we find our square, find our other square, line those guys up. And this is another thing that they really only twist one way. So then we're going to twist till you hear that click. So your lens is now on. I've got a lens on there. And then to take it off, that's where that lens release button comes in. So hold down that button, turn it the opposite way, and take off. And there you've just learned how to take a lens, put it on, and take it off. Pretty simple stuff, but we're going to pop this guy on, and then we'll talk about some other stuff in the next clip. So now that we've got a lens attached onto here, we've got to add a battery and a memory card. So much like our camcorder, we've got these external batteries here. Make sure that you have this fully charged or have access to charge it, because you don't want your battery running out and you mid-shoot. And then a memory card, that has good enough space on it to hold all the photos that you're going to be taking. So where they go on a camera, that can depend on a model. Some have separate spots for the battery and the memory card. So some will have doors on the sides here. Like this one, these aren't for memory cards, but this is for like other attachments and stuff. But some of them will have doors on the side for the memory card. Most of them, the batteries go on the bottom. For mine, both the battery and the memory card are in the same spot in this bottom drawer back here. So, all right, bring this up here. So now that we've got that open, we are going to take our battery and we slide it right in. It clicks in. This has a battery release button, just like our camcorder does. So when you pop that open, pops the battery out. Memory card, same thing. It goes above our battery here. So it slides in, give it a click, it's in there. Press it again, it pops open, and you can pull it out. So we're going to pop these guys in and leave them in there, and then we're going to close that. Alrighty, we're going to take a look at our top portion of our camera here. So our mode dial and our on-off switch are usually around the same spot. So our on-off switch right here, and you just switch that up. That turns your camera on, and then we're going to switch it down, just off for now. What's connected to it is our mode dial. So this essentially controls how you're going to take pictures. And this is different for every camera. They all kind of have different options. The most common ones used are going to be auto mode, portrait mode, landscape mode, aperture priority, shutter priority, and then manual mode. So we're going to work backwards. Manual mode. This mode is usually represented by an M. This is the ultimate control mode. So you adjust aperture, shutter speed, everything. Basically, the camera doesn't do anything besides take the picture when you hit the shutter button. Everything else is controlled by you. Next, we have shutter priority, which is either seen as an S or a TV. It's TV on my camera here. Basically, shutter priority. You control the shutter speed. That affects how fast the camera captures images, and it's really good for like freezing fast action or creating like a motion blur. Then we've got aperture priority. Ooh, too far. Aperture priority is usually represented by an A or an AV, so you control the aperture. That determines how much light is going to enter your lens, and it also controls the depth of field, so how blurry or sharp your background looks. We're going to hop to landscape mode. So landscape mode is usually represented by some kind of like mountain range type thing. It's really good for wide shots and keeping everything in focus. Right above it, you're gonna see portrait mode. Usually represented by some kind of figure. This one here is a woman, or at least what I assume is a feminine sort of figure. Anyways, it's great for taking portraits, obviously, but it focuses on the subject and kind of blurs the background. And then you've got auto. Auto is really good for when you're starting out. It does all the work. The camera does it all, basically. It adjusts everything for you, and you just have to hit the button. So those are the modes. There are tons of other modes. Like on this one, I've got ones for like close-up shots that is represented by flowers. Got one that is specifically for like action shots, so like sports photography. We've got ones for like low light conditions, and then this also has a video option, which is that little guy right there. So, but each one's all these are a little different, and it's gonna be a little different per what camera you're using. So, I know we've talked a little bit about the different modes that you can shoot in, but I just wanted you to see kind of what it would look like if you shoot in manual mode, or just kind of explain what you're seeing on the screen here. So these are some of the settings that I have set up. So on this particular camera, so it'll show this screen here, which a lot of this stuff is really customizable to what you want to see. So this is saying that it's in manual mode. So do you see how on the 1/20, there are those little like hook or like arrow looking things? So that means that that little section is selected. And remember when I talked about our scroll wheel up here on the top? So watch that 1/20 when I move this scroll wheel. So that changes those numbers. But you're saying, how do I get to anything else? Well, that's what this AV button here is for. When I hold this guy down, it switches to the other one, and this one gets the same treatment. So, and then we have on here, this camera has a button specifically for the ISO, which you can click it and it lets you set your one that you want. We've got things like our white balance, which a lot of people will auto, but there's a ton of other ways that you could do it. Daylight, shade, all that fun stuff. And then we've got things like this symbol here, the multiple pictures. That means that I have it set on multi-shot, so when I hold the shutter down, it takes more than one picture at once. I like getting just the raw images when it comes through. Some people like to also take raw plus a JPEG that then comes through, so that's a thing. Flash settings, things like that. One of my favorite parts about this camera that I have is this Q button, because this, when you have this selected, you can go all around this screen and it tells you what everything is. So like there's the aperture, that's the shutter speed, this is the ISO. You can see that that's the exposure thing, that we're in portrait, more stuff about exposure, white balance, manual focus, all that fun stuff. So that's one thing I really enjoy about this one is that Q button, because then I can just see everything on there. So menu, how to get to your menu. Most of them have a menu button. So you can have certain settings done. So we've got image quality, I chose raw, that stuff. Sometimes you can make it so it beeps at you. We've got stuff like, this is kind of color space, picture style, metering mode. We've got auto stuff, aspect ratio, grid. So like you don't have to have a grid on your camera when you take pictures. I like it. This has stuff about images, more about that. We've got like auto power off, LCD screen brightness, shutter button. You can really customize what you're looking at and things like that with all of these settings. So, and then I already got a couple different things. So this display button literally just turns off your display, so then you can use the viewfinder. It's really good if you're shooting somewhere that's like dark and you don't want people seeing your screen. But then if you click this button, it switches. So this is that screen of like when I said learning via either using the viewfinder or the screen, you're not going to see anything out of there with a lens cover on. So yeah, you can see my hand. But, so that's the screen there, but then, or if you switch it to this, you can only see through the viewfinder. That's the thing on some cameras. So, and then while we're over here, and how I mentioned that it says it's in manual focus right over here, that's a setting on my lens here. So this lens comes with a couple different things on it. So we've got a stabilizer on there, and then higher up above that, it's a little dark. It says AF or MF. Basically, autofocus, manual focus. Manual focus, you need to use this ring that's up here to focus. Autofocus, it does it for you, but we'll get into that in just a second. So that's kind of those settings on the camera there. Settings really come down to personal preference. So this is something that you really are just gonna have to sit and play around with. One thing I always recommend is if you're shooting in a specific mode on a mode dial, keep an eye on what the numbers are doing. Like when you, especially in auto, keep an eye on what those numbers are doing, because it'll help you build like a pattern of how they work. At least that's how I kind of worked through this stuff, because I did this all on my own. But yeah, really simple stuff. It looks intimidating, but once you just work your way around and understand how your buttons work, you're usually pretty good about it. Okay, so manual versus autofocus. So this is used in conjunction with your shutter button up here. So in manual focus, you are going to need to use this upper ring on your camera, and that's how you focus. And then this is how, and then moving this bigger ring is how you're going to zoom in and out. Now, you don't just have to rely on your zoom, you can just move yourself physically closer to an object. So sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. But when you are using autofocus, so I'm gonna switch this into autofocus. When you're using autofocus, you can halfway hold the shutter button down. Did you hear that? See how that's moving without me touching it? So that's it auto-focusing on the camera in front of me. And then, so you're half pressing it down. And then when you fully press it down, it'll take a picture. So you heard multiple pictures. That's because I have a setting on here that does continuous shots. But if you put it in manual and you half press that button down, nothing's gonna happen. So you have to make sure that your lens is in the focus mode you want, and that what setting you're using also reflects that. But I like autofocus to a certain extent. It does usually what it needs to do, but sometimes you just have to get in there and manually focus. So that's another one, much like our viewfinder and our screen, knowing how to do both is better than just relying on one. Alrighty, let's say you've just taken a photo and it popped up on the screen, but you missed it and didn't want to see it again. There's a playback button. It's this little blue, much like the camcorder, it's got that, looks like a play button. If you click that, it'll show you what you've just taken pictures of. I don't know if I've got anything else on this. Yeah, so I took this to a zoo, so there's photos, and you just use your buttons here to go through, and that lets you just look at all the stuff that you've taken photos of. All right, when it comes to shooting, the most common way that a lot of people will do things is just holding it. Holding it like this, one-handed, or anything like that. There are wrist straps. This one just has its plain old normal neck strap, but there are many different ways to shoot with this. You can use a tripod, so much like our camcorder, you see how it's got that little silver bit in there, that's just the tripod mount. So you can set this on a tripod, especially if you're doing think about a family portrait person that has a studio. That's usually gonna be on a tripod. Basically, anytime you don't wanna hold the camera really steady, you can use a tripod for things like that. Another point of research, know what tripod mounts and things like that work for your camera. So there is a bit of a research component to pretty much any equipment you use. You need to know what options you have in terms of them. Before we finish up, just a few additional tips, much like with our camcorder session that we did. Tripods. You can use tripods on these to get really steady shots when you're filming video or when you are doing like a long exposure time. Learning to shoot manual mode can be a little tricky at first, it can be a little scary, but once you master it, you're gonna have a lot of control over your shots and you're ultimately gonna probably feel a lot better about what pictures you're taking. Play around with some lenses. There's a bunch of different ones out there. You really never know what ones you're gonna interact with, and you might find one that you really like. So mess around, see what ones you can find, and then always clean your lens. It's no different than having backups of batteries and memory cards. Keeping your lenses clean are going to ensure that your camera equipment is up to its highest quality and that you're not gonna have a big thumbprint in the middle of your picture. So keep a lens cloth or something like that with you, just to keep them all nice and clean. So with that, go take some pictures. And just like that, you've learned about camcorders and DSLRs. So obviously this video didn't go over all the nitpicky little details about these two pieces of equipment. So a lot of those questions are probably going to be answered by you just messing around with them a bit. But if you really have a whole lot of extra questions, try looking up a video on your specific camera, because that usually helps out a little bit. So I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below and we'll take a look at them, and hit that subscribe button so that you can learn more from Media Makers Hub. So I'll see you all in the next video. Bye!